The Matchbox inheritance. Hello. My name is Margaret Thompson, and I need you to hear my story. Please take a moment to listen because what I'm about to share changed everything I thought I knew about my family. If you enjoy powerful, emotional stories like this one, please subscribe to this channel. There are many more impactful tales coming your way. It all started on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October, 3 months after my grandfather's funeral. I was 32 years old, working as an accountant in downtown Boston, living what I thought was a predictable, comfortable life. My grandfather, William Thompson, had been the pillar of our family, a kind, gentle man who'd worked his entire life as an engineer before retiring at 65. He'd lived modestly in the same small house in suburban Massachusetts for 40 years. And when he passed away at 87, we all mourned the loss of the man who'd held our family together. I'd always been close to Grandpa William. As a child, I'd spent countless afternoons in his garage workshop, watching him tinker with old machines, fix broken appliances, and teach me about patience and precision. He had a collection that fascinated me more than anything else. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of miniature cars. Matchbox cars, Hot Wheels, die-cast models from every era imaginable. They lined shelves that covered every wall of his workshop, organized by year, manufacturer, and model. To most people, they were just toys. To Grandpa William, they were treasures. Each one tells a story, Maggie, he'd say, holding up a tiny 1953 Matchbox road roller. This one right here? This is where it all began. A father's love for his daughter, making something small enough to fit in a matchbox so she could take it to school. That's how empires are built, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of love. After the funeral, my father, Grandpa Williams's only son, Robert, seemed eager to settle the estate quickly. Too quickly, I thought. Within weeks, he'd arranged for an estate sale company to come clear out the house. Everything would be sold: furniture, books, tools, and yes, even the car collection. When I protested, saying we should keep Grandpa's collection, or at least divide it among family members, my father dismissed me. "Margaret, they're just old toys," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Your grandfather lived frugally his whole life. The estate needs to be liquidated to cover final expenses and settle debts. There's barely anything left as it is." Something in his tone bothered me. My father had always been somewhat distant, focused on his real estate business, but this felt different. There was an edge of nervousness, a hurry that didn't make sense. Grandpa William had been careful with money his entire life. What debts could there possibly be? The night before the estate's sale was scheduled, I couldn't sleep. Memories of Grandpa William kept flooding back his patient smile, his calloused hands showing me how to identify rare models, his stories about the history of each miniature vehicle. At 2 a.m, I made a decision. I got dressed, grabbed my spare key to Grandpa's house, and drove through the empty streets to his home one last time. The house felt hollow without him. I walked through the dark rooms with just my phone's flashlight, making my way to his workshop. The shelves of miniature cars gleamed in the beam of light, hundreds of tiny chrome bumpers and painted hoods reflecting like stars. I ran my fingers along the collections, remembering. Then I noticed something odd. There were gaps in the collection spaces where cars should have been. The most valuable section, the one containing the earliest Matchbox models from the 1950s and the rarest Hot Wheels from the late 1960s, had noticeable holes. My grandfather had been meticulous about his organization. He would never have left random gaps like this. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo app. Over the years, I'd taken dozens of pictures in this workshop, often capturing the collection in the background. I scrolled back to photos from 6 months ago from Grandpa's 87th birthday party. I zoomed in on the shelves. There, the cars that were now missing had been there then. My heart began to race. I started searching the workshop more carefully. Grandpa William had kept detailed records of his collection in leather-bound notebooks, each car catalogued with its purchase date, condition, and estimated value. I found the notebooks in his desk drawer and began flipping through them. The most recent entries were from 2 years ago, but that wasn't unusual. He'd slowed down his collecting as his health declined. What caught my attention was a loose piece of paper tucked into the back of the last notebook. It was a printout from an auction website, dated just 4 months before his death. It showed several rare Matchbox cars, a 1953 British Road Roller, a 1956 London bus, a 1968 Hot Wheels custom Camaro in pristine condition. The estimated auction values were staggering: $15,000, $22,000, $38,000. Someone had circled these numbers in red ink. But these weren't cars Grandpa was looking to buy. They were his cars. I recognized them from his collection, and according to this printout, they'd been appraised for potential sale. My mind reeled. Grandpa William would never have sold these. They were the crown jewels of his collection, the ones he'd spent decades acquiring. Unless he'd needed money desperately. But for what? He'd had his pension, his savings, his house paid off. What could have forced him to consider selling his most prized possessions? I spent the next 2 hours searching through every drawer, every box, every file in that workshop. And then I found it, hidden in a false bottom of his toolbox. A manila envelope containing bank statements, medical bills, and correspondence that told a story I wished I didn't have to know. Grandpa William had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer 3 years before his death. The treatments weren't covered by his insurance. They were experimental, expensive, and his only hope for more time. The medical bills were astronomical, $300,000 over 2 years. He'd depleted his savings trying to fight for his life, trying to buy more time with the family he loved. But the bills kept coming, even after the treatments failed. And that's when I found the letters from my father. They were emails, printed out and carefully filed. In them, my father, who handled Grandpa's finances in his final years, promised to help cover the medical costs. He'd told Grandpa not to worry, that he'd take care of everything, that Grandpa should focus on his health and spending time with family. "Don't sell your collection, Dad," one email read. "Those cars are your legacy. I'll handle the bills." That's what family does. But there were other documents too. Bank statements showing that my father had been named on Grandpa's accounts a year before his death, supposedly to help manage his finances. And transaction records showing systematic withdrawals, small amounts at first, then larger ones. $50,000 over 6 months, moved from Grandpa's accounts to accounts I didn't recognize. I sat on the workshop floor, papers scattered around me, as dawn began to break through the windows. My father hadn't helped pay the medical bills. He'd been stealing from Grandpa, little by little, while his father was dying. And now I understood why he wanted the estate sold quickly. It wasn't to pay Grandpa's debts, it was to hide the evidence of what he'd done. Once everything was liquidated and distributed, no one would be able to trace the missing money. The car collection would be sold, the house would be sold, and my father would walk away free. But Grandpa William had known. That's why he'd hidden these documents, why he'd kept every receipt, every statement, every email. He'd known what his son was doing, and even in his pain, even as he was dying, he'd created a paper trail. He'd left evidence for someone to find. I thought about my grandfather in those final months, sick and weak, knowing his own son was betraying him. Why hadn't he confronted my father? Why hadn't he told anyone? The answer was in another letter I found, this one handwritten in Grandpa's shaky script, dated 2 weeks before he died. To whoever finds this, I know what Robert has done. I've known for months. But he's my son, and despite everything, I love him. I cannot bring myself to destroy him while I'm alive, but I cannot let him profit from his betrayal either. These documents are the truth. I trust that someone in this family still values honesty over comfort. Someone will find these. Someone will do what I couldn't. The cars, my beloved collection, they're worth more than Robert realizes. The rarest pieces are worth a small fortune. Don't let him sell them for pennies. They're meant for someone who will understand their value, not just in money, but in the stories they tell. "Love, Dad," I cried then, sitting in that workshop as sunlight streamed through the windows. I cried for my grandfather, who'd died knowing his son had betrayed him. I cried for the father I thought I knew, who'd turned out to be someone else entirely. And I cried because I knew what I had to do, and it was going to tear our family apart. The estate sale was set to begin at 9 a.m. I had 4 hours. I gathered all the documents, took photographs of everything, and carefully documented the missing cars from the collection. Then I called my Uncle James, my mother's brother, who was a lawyer. I explained everything: the medical bills, the bank statements, the missing money, the emails. His voice was grim when he responded. "Margaret, this is elder financial abuse. It's a serious crime. If what you're showing me is accurate, your father could face criminal charges." "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But Uncle James, Grandpa knew. He documented everything. He wanted the truth to come out, but he couldn't do it himself. He left it for me to find. Are you sure you want to do this? This will destroy your relationship with your father. It might split the entire family." I looked around the workshop at the hundreds of miniature cars still remaining, each one a testament to my grandfather's passion and care. Grandpa William always taught me that integrity matters more than comfort. He lived his whole life with honesty and dignity. I can't let his memory be tarnished by covering up what happened. And I can't let my father profit from betraying him. Uncle James helped me file for an emergency injunction to stop the estate sale. By 8:30 a.m. we were at the courthouse with a judge, presenting the evidence. By 9 a.m., when the estate sale was supposed to begin, police officers were at my grandfather's house instead of buyers, and my father was being questioned about the missing funds. The next few weeks were a nightmare. My father denied everything at first, claimed the documents were forgeries, insisted he'd only been trying to help. But the evidence was overwhelming. The bank records, the timestamps, the systematic pattern of withdrawals. Eventually, faced with potential prosecution, he admitted what he'd done. He'd been struggling financially, he said. His real estate business had been failing, and he'd made some bad investments. When he gained access to Grandpa's accounts, the temptation had been too much. He'd told himself he was just borrowing, that he'd pay it back once his business recovered. But his business never recovered, and the borrowing became stealing, and the amounts grew larger. "I never meant for it to go this far," he told me during one awful confrontation, tears streaming down his face. "I kept thinking I'd find a way to replace the money before anyone noticed. But then Dad got sicker, and the medical bills kept coming, and I was in too deep. I'm so sorry, Maggie. I'm so sorry." I wanted to feel sympathy for him. He was still my father, and part of me still loved the man I'd thought he was. But all I could think about was Grandpa William, dying in a hospital bed, knowing his son was robbing him, too heartbroken to expose the truth, but too honest to let it stay hidden forever. The legal proceedings took months. My father agreed to a restitution arrangement that would require him to pay back every penny he'd stolen, plus interest. He avoided criminal prosecution, but the cost was steep. He had to sell his business, sell his house, fundamentally restructure his life to make the payments. My mother, who'd known nothing about what he'd done, was devastated. She filed for divorce within a month of the truth coming out. But there was still the matter of Grandpa's collection and the missing cars. With Uncle James's help, I tracked down where my father had sold them. He'd been quietly selling off the most valuable pieces over the past year, using private collectors and online auctions to convert them to cash. Some were gone forever, sold to collectors overseas. But others I managed to trace and negotiate to buy back, though it cost a significant portion of my savings. The estate was eventually settled properly. After all debts were paid, there was enough to ensure the house wouldn't have to be sold immediately. My grandmother, who'd been living in assisted care, was able to remain there comfortably, and the car collection, what remained of it, and what I'd managed to recover, that came to me. I didn't sell them. Instead, I did what I think Grandpa William would have wanted. I kept the workshop exactly as he'd left it, and I began the work of restoring the collection to its former glory. I hunted down missing pieces at collector shows and online auctions. I documented each car's history and story, and I opened the workshop to other collectors, to children who wanted to learn about the history of miniature cars, to anyone who wanted to understand that these weren't just toys, they were pieces of history. Tiny monuments to creativity and craftsmanship. The 1953 Matchbox. Road roller, the one Grandpa had always said represented where it all began, I managed to track down and buy back for $18,000. It was worth it. When I held it in my hand, cleaned and restored, I could hear his voice, a father's love for his daughter, making something small enough to fit in a matchbox. That's how empires are built. My relationship with my father never fully recovered. How could it? Trust, once broken so completely, is almost impossible to rebuild. We speak occasionally, brief, polite conversations that dance around the elephant in the room. He's still making restitution payments, still living with the consequences of his choices. Sometimes I wonder if he understands the real cost of what he did, not the money he stole, but the legacy he destroyed, the love he betrayed, the man he disappointed. My mother was the one who suffered most, I think. She'd been married to my father for 38 years, never suspecting that he was capable of such betrayal. The divorce was brutal, not because either of them fought, but because of the weight of grief and disillusionment that hung over everything. She lives in Florida now, in a small condo near the beach, trying to build a new life at 62. But she comes to visit sometimes, and when she does, we sit in Grandpa's workshop together. She looks at the miniature cars and tells me stories I'd never heard about how my grandfather had bought her first Matchbox car when she was a little girl, about how he'd taught my father to appreciate the craftsmanship and history in these tiny vehicles, about how the collection had grown alongside their family. He loved Robert, you know, she told me once, holding a 1968 Hot Wheels custom Camaro in her weathered hands. Even knowing what he'd done, even with all the pain it caused, your grandfather loved his son. That's why he couldn't expose him while he was alive. He couldn't bear to be the one to destroy Robert's life, even though Robert had no such qualms about stealing from him. Was it worth it? I asked her. Exposing the truth? Tearing everything apart? She was quiet for a long time, turning the tiny car over in her hands, the chrome catching the light. Your grandfather once told me that the truth is like these cars, it might be small. It might seem insignificant, but it's built on precision and honesty. Every part has to fit exactly right, or the whole thing falls apart. He lived his life that way, with precision and honesty. You honored that. So yes, Margaret, it was worth it. I think about that conversation often, especially when I'm in the workshop late at night, cataloging new acquisitions or restoring damaged pieces. The collection has grown since I took it over, not because I'm trying to match Grandpa's obsession, but because I've come to understand what these miniature cars represented to him. They were more than toys or collectibles. They were a testament to the idea that small things matter, that craftsmanship and care have value, that paying attention to details is how you build something lasting. Each car, from the earliest Lesney Products road roller to the wildest Hot Wheels custom creation, represented someone's dream, someone's skill, someone's attempt to capture something real and make it small enough to hold in your hand. Grandpa William had spent 50 years building his collection, piece by piece, with patience and dedication. And in the end, he'd used that same patience and dedication to ensure that the truth about what happened to him would eventually emerge. He couldn't confront his son directly, couldn't bring himself to destroy Robert while he was alive, but he could leave breadcrumbs, could hide documents in a workshop where he knew I, of all people, would eventually look. He'd trusted me to find them. He'd trusted me to do what he couldn't. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. If exposing my father's betrayal was worth the pain it caused our family. I think about the look on my mother's face when she learned what her husband had done. I think about my younger siblings who lost their image of their father in one terrible revelation. I think about holidays that are now awkward, divided affairs and family gatherings that will never be the same. But then I remember Grandpa William lying in a hospital bed, tubes and monitors everywhere, knowing he was dying, knowing his son was stealing from him, and choosing to bear that pain alone rather than expose it. I remember the handwritten note he left. I trust that someone in this family still values honesty over comfort. He'd been right to trust me, and I'd been right to honor that trust, no matter the cost. The workshop has become a kind of memorial now, not just to Grandpa's collection, but to the values he lived by. I give tours to local school groups, showing children these miniature marvels and telling them the stories behind each one. I talk about Jack Odell creating a tiny truck for his daughter that could fit in a matchbox. I talk about the Mattel designers who dreamed up Hot Wheels, who believed that toy cars could be fast, flashy, and fun. I talk about the decades of craftsmanship, the evolution of design, the way these tiny vehicles captured the imagination of generations. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the workshop, I talk to Grandpa William. I tell him about the pieces I've recovered, about the new additions to the collection, about the people who visit and share their own memories of Matchbox and Hot Wheels cars from their childhood. I tell him that I understand now what he was trying to teach me all those years, that integrity matters, that small things have value, that love and betrayal can exist in the same family, sometimes in the same person. The rarest piece in the collection now is that 1953 British road roller, the one that started it all, the one inspired by a father's love for his daughter. I keep it in a special display case with a small plaque that reads, "This is where it all began." A father's love, making something small enough to fit in a matchbox. That's how empires are built, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of love. William Thompson, 1937 to 2023. People often ask me if the collection is valuable, what it's worth in monetary terms. I usually smile and give them a vague answer because the real answer is complicated. Yes, there are individual pieces worth thousands of dollars. Yes, the complete collection would fetch a substantial sum at auction. But that's not the value that matters. The real value is in what these miniature cars taught me about my grandfather, about my family, about myself. They taught me that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight tears your world apart. They taught me that love can be complicated, that people can fail you in the worst ways, and that honesty is a choice you make every day, even when it's hard. My father lives with his choices every day. The restitution payments will continue for years. His career is over, his reputation destroyed, his family scattered. Sometimes I feel a flicker of sympathy for him. Remember the father who taught me to ride a bike, who came to my school plays, who seemed like a good man? But then I remember Grandpa William, and I know that sympathy can't erase what was done. Forgiveness is complicated. My grandmother, before she passed away last year, told me she'd forgiven Robert. "He's my son," she said simply, "and holding on to anger only hurts me. Your grandfather would want me to forgive him." Maybe she was right. Maybe Grandpa William, who'd loved his son enough to hide his betrayal while he was alive, would have wanted forgiveness to come eventually. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean I have to rebuild a relationship with someone who proved they couldn't be trusted. I've made my peace with that. The workshop is open every Saturday now. Children come with their parents, collectors come with their stories, and slowly, a new community is building around Grandpa's collection. It's become what he would have wanted, not a static display, but a living history. A place where people connect over shared passion and appreciation for these tiny pieces of automotive art. Last month, a man in his 70s came by with his grandson. He stood in front of the 1956 London bus, tears in his eyes. "I had this exact car as a boy," he said. "Lost it decades ago when my family moved. I haven't thought about it in years, but seeing it here, it's like time traveling." He turned to his grandson, a boy of maybe 8. "These cars, they're not just toys. They're memories, connections to people we loved, to times we can't get back." The little boy looked up at him, then at the shelves of miniature cars. "Can I start collecting them, Grandpa?" "Yes," the old man said, smiling through his tears. "Yes, you can. And when you do, remember that you're not just collecting cars, you're collecting stories. Every single one has a story." That's what Grandpa William understood. That's what he tried to teach me. And that's what his collection represents now, not just miniature vehicles, but miniature monuments to the stories that connect us, the love that binds families together, and the truth that, no matter how painful, ultimately sets us free. I still add to the collection occasionally, still search for missing pieces, still document each car's history with the same meticulous care Grandpa William once showed. But more than that, I try to live by the values these miniature cars represent: precision, honesty, care for small details, patience in building something meaningful. The betrayal my father committed will always be part of our family's story. The pain it caused can't be erased, but neither can the love that came before it, or the integrity that ultimately brought the truth to light. We are all complex, capable of both love and betrayal, of both creation and destruction. What defines us is not the mistakes we make, but how we respond when those mistakes are revealed. Grandpa William responded with a quiet dignity that I still aspire to match. He documented the truth without destroying his son. He left clues without forcing a confrontation. He trusted that someone in the family would have the courage to do what was right, even when it was hard. I hope I've honored that trust. I hope that when people visit this workshop and hear the story behind these miniature cars, they understand that it's not just about collecting toys. It's about understanding that small things can have enormous significance, that patient craftsmanship creates lasting value, and that the truth, no matter how small it seems at first, deserves to be protected and preserved. My name is Margaret Thompson, and this is my story. If you've listened this far, thank you. These are the kinds of stories I want to share, stories about real people facing impossible choices, about families tested by betrayal, about finding the strength to do what's right even when it costs everything. Please subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories like this one. There are so many untold tales out there, so many families with their own versions of triumph and tragedy, love and betrayal, loss and redemption. And if you have your own story to share, your own family drama that tested your values and forced you to make difficult choices, I want to hear it. Because that's how we learn, how we grow, how we understand that we're not alone in facing these impossible situations. The miniature cars in my grandfather's workshop remind me every day that small things can tell enormous stories, that what seems insignificant can hold immense value, that patience, precision, and honesty create something that lasts far longer than any amount of money stolen or any betrayal committed. Grandpa William built an empire, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of love. And in the end, that empire, that collection of miniature cars, that legacy of integrity survived. It survived his son's betrayal, survived the pain of revelation, survived the fracturing of our family. It survived because the values it represented were stronger than the forces that tried to destroy it. That's the lesson I carry with me every day. That's the story these miniature cars tell. And that's why I'll keep this collection intact. Keep this workshop open. Keep telling this story for as long as I'm able, because some things are worth preserving no matter the cost. Some truths are worth telling no matter how painful. And some legacies are worth honoring no matter how complicated the family that created them. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonates with you, inspires you, or at least helps you understand that you're not alone if you've faced similar betrayals in your own family. Subscribe for more stories, and remember, like my grandfather always said, it's the small things that matter most. Pay attention to the details, and you'll find the truth is always there, waiting to be discovered. That's the legacy of the Matchbox cars, the Hot Wheels dreams. And one man's quiet dignity in the face of his son's ultimate betrayal. That's the story of how I learned that family secrets always come to light, that integrity matters more than comfort, and that love, real love, means telling the truth even when it costs you everything.